Have you ever imagined if behind wars and peace agreements there existed an even more dangerous invisible war? What if world leaders were being manipulated by unseen spiritual forces? In today's video, you'll hear the shocking story of Rachel Monroe, an American who died and returned with a direct message from Jesus about Putin, the future of humanity, and the hidden power of prayer. Like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which city you're watching from. Let's spread this message before it's too late. My name is Rachel Monroe, I'm 38 years old, and until a few months ago, I was a nurse in Tennessee. On the afternoon of June 3, 2025, I died in a gas station parking lot near Interstate 40. It all started with a sharp pain in my chest while I was filling my car with gas, a pain that made me fall to my knees, dropping my phone on the hot asphalt. I remember the smell of gasoline, the muffled sound of cars passing by, and someone shouting in the background, "She's fainting." But the pain didn't last, nor did the fear. In an instant, everything went silent. I was above myself, looking at my body lying next to the gas pump. The real world seemed distant, as if I were seeing through a veil. And then, the light. It wasn't just light. It was presence, a warm, enveloping force that called to me like a mother's embrace after years of not seeing her. When I was swallowed by this light, I knew I was dead. But I was also more alive than I had ever been. Suddenly, I was standing in a place that wasn't made of floor or walls. It was made of true. Everything there was pure, impossible to fake. That's when he appeared. He didn't walk up to me. It was just there. Jesus. Not as I imagined, not as in the pictures. It was living light, emanating from him, as if the entire universe breathed with his gaze. He looked at me, and I felt everything. All my sins. My doubts, my loneliness, and yet his love enveloped me as if I were the only person who had ever existed. I didn't ask anything. I didn't need to. He already knew. But then, with a seriousness that cut to my soul, he said, "You need to see, because they're lying to everyone." It was as if the sky had split open. Everything changed. The peaceful scene shattered like shattering glass. And before me, the revelation began. When Jesus spoke those words, "You need to see, because they are lying to everyone," something inside me tightened. It wasn't fear. It was a kind of sacred premonition, as if my soul was about to see something that human eyes were not made to see. The light around me bent, like fabric being ripped, and I found myself inside a dark room, immense, with stone walls and digital panels. It was as if a military bunker and a presidential chamber had been merged. In the center, a long glass table, around which they sat 7 men and 1 woman, all with their faces covered in shadows. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel his intentions. Jesus was beside me, but now I felt him more as an intense, silent presence, as if just my soul could see him. And then I heard a voice, dry, matter of fact. "The agreement will be signed within 2 days. The world will applaud, and no one will know what it really means." Another replied, in English with a thick Russian accent, "They are hungry for peace. We will deliver the illusion." On the screen in the background, I saw live footage from the Ukrainian border of tanks covered in tarps and soldiers smiling for the camera. But beneath these images, there were maps showing the real targets, invasion routes, dates, codes. "But what about the Americans?" asked the woman. A man stood up, tall, formally dressed. As he stepped out of the shadows, my spiritual knees went weak. He was the President of the United States, not like we see him on TV, full of gestures, smiles, speeches, but what he is like when he believes no one is watching. And behind him, there was something, a figure, an entity, like a man made of smoke, but with eyes burning like embers. He didn't speak, but everything about him screamed pride, manipulation, dominance. Jesus whispered within me, "This is not the man who rules. It is the voice behind the throne that dictates the course of nations." The president spoke with false firmness. "The people need hope. We'll give them a headline. They'll sleep soundly. Meanwhile, the council will execute the plan. Rebuilding will be profitable." Everyone nodded. The figure behind him leaned over and whispered something in his ear. And in that instant, I felt the smell of lies. Yes, like a real scent, like burnt flesh, mixed with expensive perfume, a fragrance that hid spiritual putrefaction. I saw that each one there believed he was in control, but Jesus showed me that everyone, without exception, was being manipulated by spiritual entities, some as ancient as Babel, others newly awakened by war. It wasn't about territory, it wasn't about politics, it was about worship, about power, about controlling the planet's narrative. And at the heart of this lie, a brutal truth: the war is not over. It has only been camouflaged, and the innocent will continue to die while the world sleeps. I turned my face to Jesus, and the pain in his eyes was more than I could bear. He didn't cry with tears, he cried with light. They are lying to everyone, and almost no one is asking me what's going on. The room began to dissolve before my eyes, like smoke blown away by the wind. Jesus wasn't touching me, but his presence guided me, and when I blinked, I found myself in another place, a space that felt neither heaven nor earth. It was like being between dimensions. Everything pulsed with a strange energy, vibrating like waves rippling through the very fabric of reality. Before me, I saw a large circle of thrones made of a black material like liquid obsidian. Each throne was occupied by an entity. None of them were human. They were spiritual beings, but with forms that imitated what men revere. One who looked like a general, dressed in shiny metals, but his eyes were empty wells. Another looked like a Wall Street tycoon, shrouded in figures and golden smoke. A third took the form of a judge, holding a scale, but the scale was broken. Jesus whispered within me, "This is the true Dark Council. It rules not with tanks, but with ideas, with influence." They were gathered around an object, something that looked like a translucent sphere, floating in the center of the room. But this sphere wasn't human technology. It was something else. It seemed alive. It breathed. It fed on something invisible. And then I realized it was fueled by adoration, by fear, by distraction. With each new scandal, each new conflict, each new international crisis, the sphere pulsed stronger. It was a spiritual machine, programmed to control the global narrative. One of the beings touched the sphere, and a hologram projected into the air. A newspaper headline: Russia and US sign historic peace treaty. Another headline appeared shortly after: Tensions return in Ukraine after alleged rebel attack. Within seconds, dozens of headlines swirled before me, all with the same essence: confusion, polarization, disinformation. And then, I saw something that completely froze me. A small point of light tried to penetrate the space. It was a prayer, faint but sincere. A man, alone in his car, praying for true peace. But as soon as she approached the sphere, the thrones began to vibrate. The spiritual beings reacted with fury. The sphere tried to distort the prayer, turn it into discouragement, into conformity, and he almost succeeded. But then a second light appeared, then a third, and a fourth, and Jesus said, "When two or more unite in truth, this technology of darkness cannot resist. It implodes." At that moment, I understood. There is a deliberate effort to sever the connection between heaven and the hearts of earth. This spiritual technology, made of deception, distraction, and manipulation, exists to weaken prayers, to dilute faith, to deceive even those who claim to be spiritual. And the most terrifying, many religious leaders were cooperating with this without knowing it. I saw mega-temples fueled by vanity, empty sermons inflamed with ego, choirs that seemed like worship but only fueled the dark council. Jesus then spoke in a voice that shook space itself. If my people knew how powerful their faith is, they would never treat it as an empty ritual. I didn't know where this revelation ended, but a certainty grew within me. The lie is much deeper than we think, and it's being built with our distractions. But in obedience, after I saw the dark council and the spiritual technology that manipulates thoughts and hearts, I felt everything inside me change. It was as if the world's lies had lost their makeup, and now everything smelled of rot. The sphere of manipulation began to unravel, and Jesus said just one sentence: "Now, look at your land." Suddenly, we were suspended over a gigantic map of the USA, but it wasn't made of paper or pixels. It was made of living energy, as if I were seeing the country with heavenly eyes. At first, I saw lights, thousands, perhaps millions, scattered across the land. Small flames, prayers, cries, silent acts of faith, some as bright as torches, others flickered, about to go out. But then, I saw the cracks. Cutting the map from east to west, from north to south, there was black lines like cracks in glass about to shatter. These spiritual lines crossed state lines, cities, communities. And where they crossed, there was a sign, breaking point. Jesus pointed to one of these lines, and I found myself transported to what appeared to be a megachurch in Houston. It was Sunday. The auditorium was packed. Strong words from the pulpit, much emotion. But when I looked with spiritual eyes, the altar was idle. The smoke of praise rose only to the ceiling and fell back down. There was no depth, just performance. The crack line ran exactly under the altar. I returned to the map. The cracks were growing. And then I saw something even worse. There were regions where the spiritual land was already dark, completely. Entire cities on the east and west coasts were enveloped in a heavy fog, where prayer barely penetrated. I saw schools, courts, government palaces, all with the same energy, pride, self-sufficiency. They no longer asked God for help. They had already chosen their own gods, fame, money, control. And then, the most terrible moment, Jesus showed me a specific line, drawn from the Gulf of Mexico to the state of Indiana, a line vibrant, red, alive, and beside it, written in flaming letters, crossed line. I asked in my mind, "What does this mean?" And he answered, "It's the limit of warning, the line between mercy and consequence. Many have crossed it without realizing it." At that moment, I saw an invisible spiritual tsunami forming over the country. It wasn't water. It was a collapse of values, a wave of deceit, ego, and division that would sweep across the nation. And its origin, the illusion of security. People believed they were at peace because the war was not in its streets, but in the spiritual world. The siege was already formed. Jesus then pointed to the center of the map, to the heart of the country, the so-called Bible Belt. And there, I saw something extraordinary, a flame still alive, fragile, but resilient. Thousands of small houses with knees bent, children praying before bed, unknown pastors who still preached with awe, old women with tear-stained Bibles. There was real power there, real light. And Jesus said, if they unite, if they cry out in faith and truth, they can reverse the advance of darkness. But he looked at me, serious as judgment itself, and added, but if you continue to be distracted, judgment will begin at home. I wanted to scream, to warn, to call out to the world, but we were still far from returning. There was more to see, more horrors hidden behind the curtain. The vision of the map of America still burned in my soul, but Jesus did not let me rest there. With a silent movement, as if space itself curved around him, we were transported. The light of the sky gave way to a thick, almost solid gloom, and in the midst of it appeared a palace that seemed to have been ripped from a nightmare. It was a colossal structure, made of dark stone surrounded by warped columns. Symbols were carved everywhere, in a language my mind didn't recognize, but my spirit I feared instinctively. In the center, raised on black marble steps, was a throne, an ancient throne, cracked by time, but still terribly active, and sitting there, Vladimir Putin. But this wasn't the man from the newspapers. He wasn't the cool, controlled politician from the conferences. This was the Putin the spirit world knew. Around him, a living presence, a gigantic entity, curved like a shadow serpent, wrapped around his neck like a cloak of darkness. Its mouth constantly approached his ear, and when the entity whispered, Putin's eyes shone with a light that was not human. Jesus spoke in a firm voice, "This spirit rules behind the throne. It is ancient, long before Russia, long before Rome." It already whispered in Babel. The entity then rose, and I saw its full form. It wasn't a creature with claws or horns. It was something far more dangerous, a spirit of sacred conquest. He made his host believe that he was on a divine mission. He used distorted verses, religious symbols mixed with ancient prophecies, to feed a false messianic calling. I saw spiritual documents presented to Putin by this entity. Each one was a revelation, the reconstruction of the Russian Empire, the orthodox redemption of the corrupt West, the holy mission of restoring Caesar's throne. And Putin believed everything. He didn't see himself as a dictator. He saw himself as a prophet, a liberator, a chosen one. Jesus showed me a scene. Putin kneeling before an altar built in secret, not by priests, but by generals. Instead of the cross, the symbol was a double-headed eagle with its eyes gouged out, and below it, inscriptions in blood. The altar was spiritual, and he had made a pact. It's not just political ambition, Jesus said. It is idolatry. It is the worship of one's own power. And then, the most devastating part, I saw that this entity wasn't just with Putin. She had divided parts of herself, fragments, and sent them to other leaders, military men, businessmen, even pastors in countries that consider themselves free. The same spirit, with multiple masks. Each fragment whispered a variation of the same lie. You are the chosen one. The world needs your leadership. Everyone is against you. Do what is necessary. It was as if a spiritual pride network was being woven across the planet. And at the center of this web was Putin's throne. A throne that ruled not only on earth, but also in the corrupted heavenly regions. Jesus touched my shoulder, and his touch made me fall to my knees. The world sees him as an ambitious man, but I see the real deal. They are lying, and he is the first to believe the lie that was made for him. The room began to dissolve, but not before I heard one more sentence, coming from the throne, spoken not by Putin, but by the entity behind him. Give them peace, so they can sleep, and then, when they open their eyes, it will be too late. After the vision of Putin's throne and the entity that ruled it like a puppet of darkness, my soul was trembling. I felt I had already seen the worst, but Jesus wasn't finished. He just said, "Now, I'll show you what the world didn't see, what almost happened." We hurtled at high speed through a darkness punctuated by twinkling lights, and then we stopped in what appeared to be underground military base, hidden under the frozen earth of Siberia. There were no flags, there were no symbols, but I knew it was Russian. It was as if the structure itself was out of time, hidden even from the world's intelligence agencies. There was a room with two uniformed men. One held a small silver device. The other typed codes into a panel that looked like a mix of modern and ancient technology. Everything happened in absolute silence, as if they had done this dozens of times before, as if that moment had been rehearsed for years. Jesus told me, this was the moment that nearly changed the course of history. An attack, a mistake, a fabricated provocation, a nuclear response. I saw on the panel the acronym Tochka Возмездия, point of retaliation, and then, as if the vision gained depth, I saw the demons. They were behind the men, excited, swarming like vultures around a carcass, small entities laughing, whispering in ancient tongues, dancing on the soldiers' shoulders, pushing his invisible fingers over the buttons. It was at this point that the older of the two men hesitated. His hand hovered over the red button. The demons screamed in fury, and then the scene froze. Jesus stretched out his hand, and everything became transparent. I could see through time, through matter. And then I saw a small room in the United States. It was a church in Kansas, with only 5 people kneeling on the ground. The leader was an elderly woman with her hair tied up and an open Bible on her lap. She said, "Lord, cover the generals, confuse the councils, place your hand between the buttons and the pride of men." Every word she said came out of her mouth like a thread of light, which rose towards the heavens and traversed realities. What seemed like a harmless, simple prayer in a forgotten corner of the American countryside was actually a missile of light cutting through spiritual space. And then, other prayers began to emerge. A boy praying with his mother in Uganda, a couple fasting in an apartment in São Paulo, a taxi driver praying quietly as he drives through the streets of London. These prayers began to intertwine, forming a wall. Jesus said, humanity was seconds away from destruction, and it wasn't negotiation, nor a secret weapon, that stopped it. It was these voices, these knees, this cry. The wall of light descended heavily upon the military base room. One of the demons shattered like glass. The others fled screaming. The general, tears in his eyes, lowered his hand and said in Russian, "Something is wrong. Cancel. Now." They left the room, and with them, catastrophe was averted. All this, no one knew. No news reports, no celebrations took place. But in the heavens, the angels sang. Jesus looked at me and said with sadness and power, "They think their prayers don't make a difference. They think they're just talking to the wall. But if they only knew what goes on in the spirit, The scene faded, and with it, a deep silence fell. But inside me, something was exploding. We were seconds from the end, and it was an arthritic grandmother with fervent faith who held the sword of destruction. After seeing invisible prayers stop a nuclear attack, I thought I understood the extent of spiritual warfare. But Jesus took me even deeper. He said, "Now see how the throne of the earth is chosen, and who actually places the crowns on the heads of kings." In the blink of an eye, we were in a colossal arena, built not of stone or wood, but of time, influence, and intention. It was a spiritual place, invisible theater, suspended above the nations. In the center, a large stage where symbols of various countries appeared: eagles, lions, flags. Surrounding the stage, a multitude of spiritual beings. On one side, angels of light, radiant, firm, wielding real spears. On the other side, fallen angels, not grotesque like monsters, but beautiful, imposing, charismatic. They were the most dangerous, for they looked like light, but they carried poison in their words. Jesus said to me, "These are the ones who decided to pursue their own glory, and now they compete for the hearts of kings." The stage then changed. It was as if we were watching the presidential elections of the world's major countries: United States, Russia, Brazil, Germany, China, Israel, but not as seen on TV. Now, I saw the spiritual backstory of each one. In every campaign pulpit, angels and demons dueled over the heads of the candidates, and in many cases, the demons won. Not because they were stronger, but because the hearts of men were already aligned with them. I saw politicians being literally pushed by entities that whispered words of power and seduction in their ears. Phrases like, "Promise what you won't keep, just to win the throne. Say it's God's will, even if he hasn't said anything. Use the language of faith, but only as bait." The angels of light moved away in silence as hearts closed. They didn't fight where they weren't invited, and it destroyed me inside, because I saw that many leaders had started out well, clean, correct, but over time began to negotiate small truths. I saw spiritual cabinets being exchanged for influence pacts. I saw religious leaders praying over candidates who, in the spirit world, were already marked with the seal of rebellion. I saw pastors being seduced by campaigns and forgetting about true intercession. Jesus showed me a specific moment, the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Above the final debate between the two candidates, there was a fierce battle. Millions of human voices praying, declaring, prophesying, but many of those voices were being manipulated. Why? Because the intercessors themselves were spiritually divided. They didn't pray for truth. They prayed for their side to win, and that fed spiritual confusion. Then I saw something that struck me deeply. A powerful angel descended with a flaming sword. He wanted to intervene. He wanted to bring justice. But when he tried to step onto the election stage, a multitude of false angels of light blocked his path. Jesus said with pain, "These are the ones who rebelled, but they still use my language. They deceive even the chosen ones." The final scene was of a golden throne being placed upon the earth, and a voice said, "The people chose," but they didn't see what was behind the curtain. And then, like a veil being ripped away, I saw that the true government was not human. It was spiritual. And if the people did not pray with discernment, if the church did not repent of political idolatry, the next kings would be puppets with golden crowns and invisible chains on their feet. After seeing the spiritual drama behind the world's elections, my insides were on fire. It was a heavy weight to bear, but Jesus wouldn't let me look away. He simply said, "Now you will see where everything converges, where your words become weapons, where the real war takes place." In an instant, we were lifted high into the heavens, but not the blue skies we see with our eyes, nor the sky of peace and light where he reigns fully. It was an in-between space, a place of conflict, of tension. It was a heavenly battlefield. Before me, an endless expanse. There was no ground, only living atmosphere. And everywhere, warrior angels in armor of light fought against beings made of shadow and smoke. The sound of swords cutting through the spiritual air was like thunder, and each blow echoed with the sound of human voices. Yes, every stroke of light was a prayer. Jesus pointed to the horizon, and there I saw a region over Ukraine. The spiritual heavens were in turmoil. Legions of demons were trying to break through the angelic barrier that protected the people. And every time a pastor knelt, every time a child said, "God, protect my father," a sort of light appeared in the hands of the angels. They didn't fight with anger. They fought with purpose. But then I looked in another direction, above the United States, and what I saw broke me. The sky was divided. Some areas were illuminated, with rows of angels keeping vigil, kept by simple churches, by praying mothers, by discreet gatherings of unknown intercessors. But other areas were in absolute silence, not because the enemy was stronger, but because no one there prayed anymore. Entire cities were in complete spiritual abandonment. The absence of prayer created vacuums, holes in the protective shield. Through these cracks, dark entities entered, whispering confusion, bringing mass depression, fueling violence like fuel. Jesus said, "People think prayer is a formality, a ritual, but every sincere cry is a drawn sword, an arrow in motion, a wall being built." Then I saw a scene I will never forget. A woman in Detroit, kneeling alone in a room with peeling wallpaper, holding a Bible open to Psalm 91. As she said, "1,000 may fall at my side, but I trust in you." One giant angel received a new sword, and with it, took down 3 entities that were trying to invade a school in that neighborhood. At the same time, I saw a young Christian in Seattle who stopped in the middle of a walk to pray for a faraway country he didn't even know where it was. That prayer crossed continents and activated a legion of light that intercepted a tank convoy on the Ukrainian border. The young man never knew, and perhaps he never will, but heaven never forgets. Jesus looked at me, with eyes that saw 1,000 wars at the same times, and said, "They want to control the tanks, the treaties, the microphones, but true power lies where they don't look, in the dark room, on the bended knee, in the broken cry." And then he showed the future, 2 possibilities, one where prayer fades and angels retreat, and another where the people awaken, cry out, unite, and heaven is filled with spiritual weaponry like an arsenal of light exploding into living force. The vision faded, but my spirit knew, the battlefield is armed, and the most powerful weapon is still despised. As the vision of the celestial battlefield began to fade, the silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion I had ever heard. I stood there beside Jesus, my spirit broken. I felt like I had seen too much. But then he looked at me, and his eyes were different. Now they were the eyes of a king, the eyes of a judge, eyes that carried the weight of a decision about to be made. He spoke in a firm voice, which echoed throughout the plain where we were. A destiny is being sealed, and many are sleeping while it is being written. At that moment, below us, the spiritual map of the United States re-emerged, but this time, bathed in a pulsating red light. It was as if the very soul of the country was screaming or burning. I saw Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court, but not as we see them on TV. Now all the buildings were shaking, as if they were built on quicksand. Jesus showed me the spiritual archives of nations. Each country had a book, a kind of scroll of records, promises, and covenants. The one in America was huge, thick, bright, but dirty, stained, cracked, torn. And he said to me, "This country was called to be a beacon, but it is on the verge of being a torch that burns itself out." I saw quick visions like flashes, false revivals broadcast as reality TV, children being educated by spiritual algorithms controlled by distraction demons, anointed preachers selling their anointing as if it were a concert ticket, judges passing laws with the pen of hidden demons. And then Jesus said, "They want to place their hope in parties, platforms, and presidents. But the heart of the nation is sick, and no one wants to treat the root cause. They paint over the fever like makeup." The scene changed. We 2 Americas before me. In the first, crowds continued to laugh, consume, argue, ignore. The sky above them, it was pitch black, and I saw demons descending without resistance. And when everything seemed to collapse, they asked themselves, how did this happen? Where was God? On Monday, I saw repentance. Not just emotional prayers from a Sunday service, but people tearing up contracts with hell, people deleting platforms, people asking for forgiveness, people washing each other's feet. And I saw angels descending, thousands. They came not with judgment, but with healing, with fresh anointing, with real power. And over this America, An inscription was engraved in the air. In flaming letters, "There is still time." Jesus then looked at me with tears in his eyes, but tears that shone like liquid fire, and said, "They think they are in control, that they are winning, but I am the Lord of the nations. I set up and remove kings. I expose the hidden, but I do not force anyone to turn to me." Then he came closer. I felt the universe bow to his presence. There will come a time when the window will close, and many will know that I warned, that I shouted, that I cried, but that I was ignored. My spiritual legs gave way. I fell to my knees, and everything inside me screamed, "Then why do you still show me this, Lord?" And he answered, "For there are those who will listen. There are remnants. There are watchmen, and you are one of them now. Speak out. Be alert. Show what you have seen. They are lying to everyone, but I still speak to anyone who will listen." After Jesus' words, everything inside me fell silent, not out of peace, but out of reverence. I knew that what he had shown me was not just a revelation, it was a summons. The light around us began to intensify, not like before, when it was soft and welcoming. Now it was like brightness of a dawn that tears through the darkness with authority. I tried to speak, but my mouth couldn't form words. Only my heart cried out, "Lord, how can I bear this weight?" He looked at me with a tenderness that was overwhelming and said, "You will not return alone. I will be with you, and many will hear, even if they do not understand right away. The seed will be planted." Then, as if it were the last lesson, he reached out his hand over my chest, and a living light entered my spirit. It was like a code, a seal, a mission sealed in sacred fire, and the words were engraved on me like an invisible tattoo. "Awaken those who sleep. Shout to those who are silent. Expose what is hidden." At that moment, the space around me began to spin, fast. Everything seemed to spin and fall apart at the same time. I saw faces, thousands of them, people I'd never met, but who somehow was waiting for me. Jesus walked away, not because of rejection, but because my time to leave had come. With a voice of authority and compassion, he said, "Tell them that world peace is a sham, that negotiations between leaders are smoke over an abyss, that as long as they trust in men, they will walk blindfolded toward judgment. But also say that there is hope, that there is still light, that the knees of the righteous are stronger than the weapons of the wicked. They are lying to everyone, but I never lied." It was then that I felt something like a tug, a whirlwind of air, as if I were being sucked into eternity itself. The light vanished, the sound vanished, and suddenly, a scream, cold light, beeps and voices all around. I went back. My eyes opened in a hospital room. Monitors were beeping. Doctors were all around. A nurse said, "She's waking up." I felt my body weigh like a stone. But in the midst of the confusion, the pain, the medical questions, I was certain of only one thing. I had seen what was behind the curtain. I had been with Jesus, and I had been sent back with a truth that goes against everything that is being said in the media, on the platforms, in the lukewarm churches. They are lying. And meanwhile, there is a spiritual war that cries out for awake sentinels. If you've listened to me this far, know this. You were chosen to know this. And now, you bear the responsibility of not keeping quiet. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, please leave a like, comment, share your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.